Hey guys, here we are in southern Portugal riding KTM's 2020 1290 Super Duke R. This is KTM's high performance open class naked bike. A couple years ago, KTM used to really focus in the sport bike segment with its RC8 and then RC8R project. They abandoned that after a few years. We loved riding the RC8R, but unfortunately it just wasn't close to being competitive in the superbike class. So KTM went a different direction. Instead of focusing on sport bikes, they went to focus on naked class streetfighter sport bikes. And that brings us to the 2020 Super Duke R. Now it's crazy to think, but KTM's actually been making these Duke street bikes for 26 years. 2020 is the 26th anniversary of Duke KTM street bikes. And this 1290 Super Duke R is really just an evolution of that concept. For 2020, KTM's done a lot of great changes to this motorcycle. The chassis is new, suspension's new, rear suspension's been overhauled, the electronics, the bodywork. There's a lot of things that have been updated on the motorcycle. Let's get right into it. The engine. Now, KTM has been making these LC8 V-twins for over a decade. And I really like how they keep evolving the engine. The cases are lighter on it now. It now includes an all-new air intake system. So the air box has been redesigned. It now incorporates ram air to keep that air box just loaded with air. It also adds a set of shower head fuel injectors. Shower head fuel injectors complement the primary fuel injectors, and it gives the engine more fuel at higher RPM. A complaint that we've always had with the 1290 Super Duke is that it doesn't have a lot of top end power. Well, the improvements that they've made to this bike, now it does have more balls up top. Last time we dynoed this motorcycle, it made about 155 horsepower in the dyno. I would go to say that this bike's probably good for 158, 159 now at the business end of the Bridgestone Vatlax S22 rear tire. Still, really the highlight of this motorcycle is just the amount of torque it makes. There's few motorcycles out there that make the kind of torque as this 1.3 liter V-twin does. Over 90 foot-pound of torque from a very low RPM, and it gives you that grunt off corners where you can just really just pass people and feel the acceleration force of this motorcycle. It's a very exhilarating bike to ride. The engine still does vibrate at times excessively. You have to remember, the architecture of this motorcycle engine is very, very old, yet KTM still has something. There's something to be said about this architecture because it has a lot of torque, it has great charisma, and the modifications they've done to this engine have made it feel more modern. The throttle response and the engine power maps, they're spot on. When you twist the throttle, this thing jumps off the line very well, yet the throttle response isn't overly sensitive where it's going to get away from you. Of course, you can tailor the way the engine makes power via the really slick color TFT display, which is all new for 2020. We wish it had touchscreen, but KTM is really adamant about not having the rider take his hands off the controls while riding. So we'll forgive KTM for this. At the end of the day, it's a very slick setup. The menu navigation is very easy to use. The tactile function of the buttons is eerily similar to KTM's neighbor above them. So kudos to KTM for really focusing on the fit and finish and getting that aspect of the motorcycle correct. Chassis, I've never really been a big fan of the 1290 Super Duke R since it came out in 2014. It always felt like a giant supermoto or a giant dirt bike, kind of loose, kind of hyper, but the changes they've done to especially the rear suspension have really allowed this bike to be way more compliant, way more calm. The hyperactivity of the chassis, which was a signature feature of the old Super Duke, is gone, and the chassis is much more planted. This motorcycle now feels more like a conventional road-going, high-performance naked bike. Where the old bike kind of felt a little loose, this thing's a lot more compliant. So kudos to KTM for fitting the rear suspension with a linkage and still keeping the aesthetic of the motorcycle good. Like, look at the rear swing arm on this motorcycle. It's a very nice piece of machinery and it looks very good. Suspension also adds preload adjustment at the front. That was another big gripe I always had with the Super Duke R's. You couldn't adjust the spring preload on the fork. The rear shock has a clever knob, so you can adjust the spring preload without tools. KTM's always really good about having their suspension being easy to adjust without tools, and this 1290 Super Duke R continues that trait. A little bit more sporty ergonomics than what we've seen, but again, it fits with the whole road bike concept. Overall, I'm really pleased with what KTM's done with this 1290 Super Duke R. It is faster, it's more fun to ride, the chassis is more compliant in terms of not only road holding when you're getting after it in the corners, but also still delivering a very comfortable feel. The seat's wide. The ergonomics are a good balance between sport and comfort. If you're looking for an open class naked bike that's exhilarating and now has the polish and pedigree, this 2020 1290 Super Duke R is definitely something you should consider, especially considering the MSRP is only crept up by a couple $100 versus the 2019 version. You get a whole lot more bike and more value for your money. All right, guys, that's a wrap from the 2020 KTM 1290 Super Duke R press introduction here in southern Portugal. If you like what you saw today, make sure to subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.